Starting in 5 seconds. Madam Deputy Chairman, when the House rose for lunch, I was discussing the response of the public to the loan program of the government and was trying to point out that it was rather a serious tendency in the sense that the response of the public had been proved to be poorer during the second plan period than during the first plan period. I was trying to point out that looking to the fact that the national income was rising and the people were becoming more conscious of a developing economy and the need to mobilize the resources more and more, a contrary trend ought to have appeared, and that in view of that this trend was distributing. This trend is to be contrasted with the trend of the public regarding the call from the corporate sector for the investment of their monies. Here we find that the shares of some of the new companies or of the old companies that are issuing new shares are oversubscribed at times to the extent of 15 times the capital that has been asked for by the companies. So here are two pictures. One, the picture of the government asking the public to subscribe to the public loans, and the other, the picture of the response of the public to the corporate sector demanding investments from the public. While on the one hand there is an enthusiastic response to the demand from the corporate sector, on the other there is a very poor response as far as the loan program of the government is concerned. This is a matter of some concern, and I feel that the government should pay more attention than just exhorting the people to save more and to hand over their savings to the government, as the Honorable Finance Minister has done more than once. If it would have been merely a question of rediverting the money that is coming from the corporate sector to the public exchequer in the form of loans, perhaps the matter would not have been so serious. Then it would have been just a question of reallocation of the functions between the public sector and the private sector. But I feel that there is a large amount of money which is just changing to some lucrative channel, and that explains why the response to the demand from the corporate sector is 15 times. This shows that 14 times that particular capital is not required by that company, and if there had been some adequate step or measure whereby originally that money could have gone to the public exchequer, to that extent there would not have been any disappointment to the people who wanted shares but who did not get them, and disappointing to the public exchequer by not getting the response which it ought to have got. That, to my mind, leads to the question of the pattern of the rate of interest in a developing economy, and especially in view of the fact that a large number of companies are being floated today which have got an element of growth in them, thereby attracting so much capital towards them. The government of India will have to take into consideration the question of the rate pattern of interest on their loans and to see whether something could not be done whereby the public will be attracted to a large extent towards their loan program. Then hitherto it has appeared in the press that the question of supply and want is being reconsidered and that offers are sought to be made more attractive. If in the same strain the entire question of the loan program is also considered, it may be possible that these loans also might be made more attractive and thereby more capital, which is today just changing the channels of profitable employment, might be diverted to the public exchequer in the form of public loans. Then there is the question of the state governments performing their part which has been assigned to them during the third plan period. In this connection, I would like to draw the attention of the Honorable House to a very important recommendation which has been made by the Third Finance Commission, namely the appointment of a high power commission to go into the entire question of the allocation of financial resources between the central government and the state governments. They have argued the whole case in nearly 1.5 pages in order to show why it has now become necessary that a high power commission should be appointed to go into this important question. According to the Third Finance Commission, the allocation of resources between the center and the states was made at a time when planned economic development was not visualized. When the constitution was framed, the development of the public sector, the new responsibilities which the states were going to assume, and a plan era were not properly visualized, and it was under these conditions that these allocations were being made. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Madam Deputy Chairman, I rise to support the bill which has been moved by the Honorable Minister of State in the Ministry of Home Affairs. This bill incorporates certain sentiments which the country holds so dear as far as the office of President is concerned, and also incorporates the faith of the people in themselves that when they will elect a president, the person who would be occupying the high post would be a person who would have not only the love and affection of the people but would be, as the Honorable Minister pointed out, a dedicated politician whose whole life is dedicated to the service of the nation. Before he became the president, during his occupation of the office of president, and even after he retired from that office. It is this confidence of the people in themselves and the high love and affection which they hold for this office which have resulted in this particular bill being considered by the House at the present moment. The Honorable Minister has pointed out that the President who has just retired has fulfilled all the requirements which are the basis of this particular measure, and the measure which was passed in 1951. I wish that he had mentioned the last Governor General also, to whom both the measures apply. Whether we may agree or may not agree with the last Governor General on some of the political views that he holds, there can be no two opinions that the last Governor General was also an illustrious son and is an illustrious son of this country and deserves all the consideration, all the love and all respect of the country which are being incorporated in the present measure and were incorporated in the 1951 Act. While therefore fully supporting the measure which is now before the House, I would like certain clarifications regarding the rules that are going to be made for giving effect to the provisions which have been incorporated in the present bill. In the statement of objects and reasons, we are told that a person holding the high office of president has, even after retirement, many public calls on him, and it is therefore considered desirable to provide him with secretarial staff. It is further stated that the bill provides for a staff which may be engaged for the president. Staff might be appointed for him and office space might be provided for him. It is because of this that certain misgivings have arisen in the minds of some of the members, and they want it to be made perfectly clear that the staff will be appointed not only for the ex-president but will be appointed by the ex-president, and it will be his wishes and his desires that will be taken into account when a particular person is being appointed. Also, regarding the office which is engaged for him, his wishes should be taken into account so that he knows what would be a convenient place for him and he may be to get that place. Another reason for insisting on what I consider to be an important detail is that if the government appoints the staff for the ex-president, then automatically they become government servants because they have been appointed by the government. It may be that in the rules, a clarification might be attempted whereby they may be exempted from some of the service conduct rules which are applicable to normal government servants, but even there it will be much better that this should not be left in any doubt, and that these persons that are appointed to assist the ex-president in his secretarial task are appointed by the ex-president himself. They would be the staff of the ex-president and would not be appointed by the government for the ex-president and would not be government servants. This point ought to be made quite clear so that the ex-president has got all the rights of determining the service conditions of the people appointed by him, of course subject to the overall limit which has been provided and, to my mind, rightly provided in the bill. Within that overall limit, perhaps it will be much better to leave the rest of the matter to the president himself, so that we may also express our further confidence in the president to the effect that he would utilize it with discretion and with all sense of responsibility and fair play, and taking into account the interests of the public and of the public exchequers too. Another point which also needs some clarification is regarding the payment to be made for the secretarial assistants and for the secretarial staff. Normally, government rules require that whenever any such demand is made on the public exchequer or on the consolidated fund of India, a certain formality has to be gone through, and that formality of accounting has to be in a prescribed form. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman, first of all, I must place on record my grateful thanks to the University Grants Commission for the work that they have done for the advancement of higher education. They have done good work and in full cooperation with the Education Ministry. This, I think, must encourage state governments to establish university grants commissions or committees in their respective states. What the country needs most is the coordinated efforts of the autonomous university grants commissions working in harmony with the state governments and university authorities. Coordinated efforts are needed to bring about certain uniformity in the standards of university education. Without that, our educational advancement is bound to suffer from various tensions and difficulties. I do agree with my friend that the annual report under discussion is rather a dull report. At least it is not as bright as the two previous reports were. In the previous two reports, the University Grants Commission invited the attention of the nation to certain academic problems, to certain educational needs. Unfortunately, in this report, the University Grants Commission confines its remarks mostly to what has been achieved in the field of university education under the guidance and with the assistance of the University Grants Commission. However, sir, it is not possible for me to agree with Mr. Sathanam that the University Grants Commission should not extend help to universities for the preservation of manuscripts. Manuscripts are of great importance so far as university libraries are concerned. It is the duty of universities to preserve those manuscripts, and it is the duty of the University Grants Commission to extend to universities the necessary financial assistance for maintaining and preserving the manuscripts in good order. Also, it is not possible for me, sir, to agree with my friend that today universities are enjoying too much of autonomy. I agree with the University Grants Commission, which 2 years ago remarked that freedom is vital for education and democracy, and I personally feel, sir, that on one plea or the other university autonomy and academic freedom are being restricted rather than being extended as they must be. I do not think, sir, that a social purpose or a social value can be imparted in the teaching by a teacher through the imposition of restrictions on his freedom of thinking. I feel that teachers need academic freedom for discharging their duties in an efficient way. If we take into consideration the affiliated colleges, we will notice that the teachers are subjected to such humiliating conditions that it is not possible for them to discharge their duties to their students, to impart to their students any sense of responsibility or any moral values in their lives. I therefore, sir, feel that it is necessary to be more careful about the preservation of academic freedom to teachers. Sir, we are grateful to the Education Ministry and to the University Grants Commission for upgrading the salaries of teachers in the center universities. Yet, a great disparity prevails in the salaries of teachers of central universities and state universities and affiliated colleges, and this disparity is causing a lot of heartburning and a lot of difficulties. As one connected with education, I may say that there is not such a marked difference in the quality of teachers serving in the central universities and in the state universities and in affiliated colleges as to justify the great disparity in the salaries of teachers of these institutions. I feel, sir, that we must keep in our mind the remarks of the University Grants Commission made in their earlier annual report with regard to teachers salaries. We are not only to provide adequate salaries to teachers of affiliated colleges but also to teachers of secondary schools. We must remember, sir, that a great majority of students study in affiliated colleges and the quality of education is largely determined by the quality of work that is done in affiliated colleges. For improvement in the quality of teaching, improvement in living conditions is also very necessary. The University Grants Commission has invited our attention in its report to the appalling conditions in which teachers have to live. But unfortunately, the University Grants Commission has to admit that it does not seem likely that we shall be able to make anything more than the marginal contribution towards this practical need. I feel that the University Grants Commission should pay more attention to the solution of this problem than has so far been paid by it and the Education Ministry, and that the government should not grudge funds to the University Grants Commission for making adequate arrangements for improving living conditions of teachers who are expected to train the citizens of the country. Sir, in the University Grants Commission report, it is maintained that rupees 12,000 should be granted to every affiliated college for the welfare of the teaching staff, and that efforts should be made to provide them with quarters, and that too in the vicinity of the college where they have teach. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman, I would now like to make a few observations on the Ministry of Education. Education is basic to any national regeneration. It is true that it does not bring any return as our other projects do, as for instance the steel projects or the irrigation projects do, but this is the investment that is designed to help building up of the human material. It is agreed that education has expanded after independence and during the plan periods, but it is a matter for concern that the content of education has not been equal to our expectations. Even today, we are engaged in experimenting with all types of education from the basic stage up to the university level. It is not clear, I presume, that the basic pattern of education of which so much was said and written is accepted as a success even today. Where do we stand with regard to the basic pattern? It seems to be the position that all arguments are in favor of that type of education, but all proof is against the success of such a type of education. Where does the government stand with regard to this type of education? We swore by the basic type of education because it was discovered by the father of the nation. But if it has been a failure, why should not the government say that that is the position? Then again, take secondary education and also collegiate education. 3 years ago, it was said that all universities should have 3-year degree courses, and some universities which were reluctant to accept this reform were more or less compelled to do so, and they accepted it. Now, certain universities find that this scheme is not working satisfactorily, and they feel that they should have a 2-year course in the college before students could enter the degree course. I mention this to show that this eternal tinkering with education should stop, and it should not go on like this. This uncertainty is not only with regard to the main objective of education, the main structure of education from the primary to the collegiate level, but also with regard to the courses of studies and also with regard to the language or medium of instruction. Mr. Chairman, up to the secondary stage, it has been accepted that the medium of instruction should be the regional language. The National Integration Council, however, stated that if universities are to exchange professors, if they have to develop freely, then there should be the common medium of instruction, namely English and Hindi. Now, at the latest National Integration Council meeting, we are told that the medium of instruction in the colleges should also be the religion language ultimately, and if that comes to pass, I ask, how will national integration be achieved? It is permissible to envisage a stage if the scheme of the National Integration Council is implemented, where different universities will have different media of instruction, and the men that will be drawn from these universities will have to man the judiciary of the land and the All India services, but they will not be able to serve in a state other than the one in which they were educated. How can integration be achieved? We are working at cross purposes. It is time that a high power body was appointed to hammer out a national scheme of education having integration as the basic aim and to implement it systematically. The present method of meddling at every stage of education, the present climate in which we are not clear about the medium of instruction at different stages, is causing concern to the parents, to the pupils, and weakening the country in the process. This is a major problem as the stage of the development of the country. Then, Mr. Vice Chairman, I would pass on to the Ministry of Transport and Communications. According to this ministry, we are to build a system of national highways, provincial or state highways, an integrated system of communications from the village upwards, but the central government is concerned with the construction of national highways. It is good to have a fine system of national highways. It also serves as a physical link for integrating the nation. It is good, but this planning of construction of national highways without regard to the development of railways and the development of industries in the regions in which the highways are proposed to be constructed will be something beyond our means at the present moment. Assuming that we have a network of national highways, are they to be put to immediate use? Are they good investments? Unless you have industries, small, big, or medium, coming along the highways, unless they assure you a fair return for the investment, it is not desirable to have a system of highways for the sake of mere transport of passengers. In other words, we should have a scheme of priorities for the national highways so that they can be looked after. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman, Sir, I rise to support the Plantations Labour Amendment Bill brought up by the government for our consideration. Sir, the sad plight of millions of toiling people who sweat on various plantations in the country to earn valuable foreign exchange for us is really too much to be expressed in words. These workers live and work in most inhuman and pitiable conditions. These plantations include tea, coffee, cinchona, rubber, etc. And as we know, tea alone is one of the major foreign exchange earners of our country. But sir, it is indeed most regrettable that notwithstanding a lapse of 34 years since our independence, these workers who earn crores and crores of rupees by way of foreign exchange have to live in most miserable conditions. They live in houses that are most insecure and collapse frequently, and when these workers die as a result of these collapses, their guardians or their dependents do not get even due compensation for the loss that they have to bear unhygienic living in distant and far-flung areas, compounded with lack of medical and educational facilities, make their life utterly miserable. Their plantation workers have to live in abject poverty like slaves of their employers. And as we know, most of these plantations are still foreign owned establishments, last vestiges of the colonial rule, this the British rule, and as I said, it is a matter of deep regret for all of us that despite enacting an act, the Plantations Labor Act 1951, we have not yet been able to effect any improvement in their conditions. I think the employers alone, we are not responsible for their miserable condition. We are also as much responsible as they are, because although we could enforce the enactment and we could improve their conditions much earlier, we have failed in doing so. Sir, on the 9th May 1973, this House, the Rajya Sabha, decided that a joint committee should be appointed to look into the desired amendment and put up a draft as early as possible for our consideration. On the 26th May 1973, the Lok Sabha also adopted our resolution, our motion, with the result that a 45-member committee in which 15 representatives were from the Rajya Sabha and 30 from the Lok Sabha was appointed to look into the matter. This committee was to submit its report on the first day of the 85th session of the Rajya Sabha, that was in 1973. But this committee had to be granted 3 extensions, and the report was ultimately available on the 3rd March 1975. At that time, as we all know, the so-called JP's movement of total revolution was at its peak. Within 2 or 3 months, the national emergency had to be declared, and during the emergency, priorities had changed, and we could not just affect this desired improvement at that time, and we could not bring about this legislation. And then the Janta rule and the Lok Sabha Lokdal rule. But for 30 months they were in power, but they have to, although they try to pose to be the champions of the downtrodden and the workers, failed to deliver the goods, and that is why today we are going to consider the report of that committee that was presented to the government in 1975. Therefore, we are also equally responsible for not ameliorating their conditions and their plight. The committee had to consider 120 memorandum giving views and suggestions from various unions and associations, and 59 witnesses appeared before the committee, and that committee itself came to the conclusion that in various areas, even the barest minimum facilities such as arrangement for supply of wholesome drinking water, latrines, urinals, provision of qualified doctors had not been provided, though these amenities are a must under the Act. The Act has been there, but we could not enforce it, we could not implement it only because the employers did not want it. They did not want to give to the workers due justice. Inadequacy of punishments that are awarded under the Act is one of the main impediments standing in the way of implementation of various welfare measures. Courts generally take a lenient view of the offences under the Act and they let off the employers who are offenders with lighter punishment, which generally amounts to a fine of ₹100. So the committee suggested amendment to section 36 of the Act. An employer is required to provide these workers living accommodation, but generally, in spite of the fact that the government gives loan and subsidies to the employers for construction of houses, progress in regard to these construction is very poor. As I said earlier, very unhygienic and insecure houses and are there where these people have to live. Even compensation to the workers in the event of house collapse is not given. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman, I was speaking about the need for developing a strong UN delegation. I wish that the Honorable Prime Minister would give his attention to this aspect of the matter, particularly in view of the fact that in the next decade or two, politics all over the world would take on a complex character, and it is necessary that men are trained from now on for taking part in international affairs. In the UK and the United States, such delegations are built with men who have wide knowledge of international affairs, and there should be other qualification for a man to be included in such a delegation. In this connection, I should also like to mention that it is time for government to develop sound conventions regarding the conduct of foreign affairs. In the United States, they have accepted that the principle of bipartisan consultation on important affairs of policy. For example, when President Kennedy stood for election, President Eisenhower, even during the period of the conduct of the campaign of President Kennedy, kept him informed about major developments in foreign affairs. We have seen our government sending troops out of this country to the Congo, and at that time I had raised the point that before troops left our country for any assignments of an unusual character like the Congo assignment, members of the opposition should be informally consulted. There will be no question of any leakage of information whatever if leaders in the opposition are consulted on important aspects of foreign policy. The consultative committee of the External Affairs Ministry does go some way to meet the needs of exchanging information about foreign affairs, but the informal consultation of the kind that I mention, where the leader of the opposition and leaders of other parties are called and told by the Prime Minister about unusual developments, would strengthen the conviction that the foreign policy of the country has the support not only of the Congress party but also of the entire country. I was speaking about our external publicity, and it is a subject on which I think I can speak with some confidence, as I have been an old-time newspaperman in this country. The material which is sent out to foreign countries is extremely scrappy and useless. There is included in these messages some statements of what this minister was saying somewhere. We are trying to give publicity to ministerial activities, and it is inevitable that some such publicity should be given, because ministers are in charge of the government, but one abroad does not get a real idea of what is happening in the country. I would like to suggest for the consideration of the External Affairs Ministry that they should send a fortnightly assessment of what is happening in India, written dispassionately, not to please a minister or to highlight something that he has done, but to give an objective assessment of what is going on in the country. In the old days, when the British government was in existence, such fortnightly reports used to be sent by various state governments, and I think a beginning can be made in that direction in this matter. The other point I would like to suggest is that publicity is a complicated and technical matter. The Foreign Service, as it is constituted today, does not have sufficient training in publicity. The Estimates Committee, which went into the demands of the External Affairs Ministry, mentioned about the methods of training which have been adopted, but since our foreign servicemen are not trained in publicity work, and one sees, for example, that a lot of confusion has arisen in the United States over Ambassador Nehru's statement, I think the External Affairs Ministry might well set up a committee of members of parliament who are conversant with external publicity and some newspaper men to advise the External Affairs Ministry from time to time. I do not think that the committee will ask for information which is confidential or secret, but they can assist the newspaperman. There are a handful of competent men who would be willing to serve on the committee in an advisory capacity. They would be able to tell the External Affairs Ministry what should be done in order that our news publicity abroad is better. I might mention also that the estimate committee had recommended the creation of a cultural cell. Sir, to my mind, we have also to be clear in our mind regarding the objective of rural industrialization. Do we mean to have only diversification of rural economy, and are we going to have rural industrialization only in order to give some help to those who find themselves unemployed during a certain period of the year? Are we aiming to add utilizing local resources and meeting local needs through diversification of rural economy, or have we a more fundamental objective in mind when we are trying to industrialize the rural areas? Without this, I am afraid rural industrialization will not be possible. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. If you scan the history of the railways in this country, you will see that it was the presidency towns Bombay, Madras, and Kolkata that determined the pattern of our railways as well as of our industrial and economic growth. The British, when they landed in this country, established trading centers called forts. In Madras, it was Fort St. George. In Calcutta, it was Fort St. Williamson, and in Bombay, it was merely a fort, and there was one in Surat also. It is these trading establishments which determined the pattern of government, the pattern of administration, and every other pattern under the British regime. They constructed the railways, they established the industries, they located their armies with reference to these three presidency towns. This idea of the presidency towns determining the pattern of our social structure, industrial advancement, and the system of our railways still persists. That is the mental lag that is hampering the vision of the Planning Commission, the Railway Board, and the Railway Ministry. Sir, once I happened to travel from London to Rome by train. Another time I had to travel from Moscow to Leningrad by train. Nowhere did I find on the continent of Europe lines of varying breadths. It is all a uniform gauge. So, is it in Russia? It may be 6 feet there. In America, in every industrially advanced country, you find that the gauge is uniform. This very country which ruled us, namely the United Kingdom, had inside its border a uniform gauge, but they inflicted 3 systems of the gauge on India. They thought that would perpetuate what is called their domination, or in the negative sense that it would impede the industrial and economic growth of India. Secondly, it would make India always the customer and purchaser of lines and locomotives and rolling stocks from the United Kingdom. In the old days, I am told it is the government which built the broad gauge line, and it is the private companies that took to this meter gauge and the narrow gauge. Though they may not have had the distinction of private and public sector in view then, it now appears that what the so-called public sector then did has been good, and what the private sector then did has been to our disadvantage. I would appeal to these agencies to introduce a uniform gauge throughout India. In this connection, it will be interesting to note the talk of the Honorable Railway Minister about the schools, primary schools, higher secondary schools, and high schools for the Indian Railways. If you examine the previous speech of the Railway Minister and also the working report of the Railway Board, you will find that the same figure is repeated every year. I have examined the figures and I find that this year only 16 schools have been added, out of which 13 are primary schools, 1 is the higher secondary school, and 2 are middle or high schools. Instead of saying that they have been able only to provide 13 primary schools or 1 or 2 more high schools or higher secondary schools, the same figures are repeated in the speech. Although the Railway Board has all along been saying that education is the responsibility of the state and therefore the Railway Board does not own his responsibility, I would like to remind the Railway Minister about the agreement reached between the National Federation of Railwaymen and the Railway Board in the year 1955, according to which the Railway Board undertook to provide primary schools for the education of the children of railway employees. Sir, as I told you earlier, I had to say many things on the floor of this house, but I will conclude with only 1 or 2 more observations. I will first deal with the labor relations on the Indian Railways. I slightly differ from my honorable friend when he quoted me as saying that the permanent negotiating machinery has completely failed. It is a fact that this machinery is not functioning satisfactorily. At certain places, it has failed. There is no doubt about it, but I would say in this house, most frankly, that at the board's level, this machinery has been working successfully. But this is not the position so far as the zonal railways are concerned. I do not say that in all the zonal railways it is so, but in certain zonal railways and in most of the divisions of these railways it has failed. I was expecting that the railway minister would examine the working of this machinery in all the railways. What is the greatest defect in this machinery? This machinery suffers to the extent that at the board level, if there is difference of opinion between the railway board and the railway labor, no arbitration machinery is provided to settle the disputes. The provision in this machinery is that as and when an occasion arises, an ad hoc tribunal would be set up by government. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. May I, Madam, draw the attention of the Honorable Minister to an important committee set up by the Government of India in 1958 under the chairmanship of Mr. Negi, who was asked to inquire into the various problems of railway road coordination. Their preliminary report appeared some time ago and it was even circulated to all the state governments for their opinion. But to my regret, I have to say that the work of this committee has been very much hindered as a result of the indifference and may I say careless negligence on the part of the state governments as well as on the part of the ministry concerned in taking up this question and in pursuing it, so that we may be able to have a clear and comprehensive picture of the transport situation in the country. Now, railway transport, like any other mode of transport, is suffering and under a major handicap. The handicap being that we do not know, nor does the railway ministry know, what the exact quantum of transport requirement in the country is and what the rising demand is which the railways are expected to cater to in future. Certain targets which have been worked out in the third plan have been given to us. In the second plan, we were given certain targets, but unfortunately, Madam, may I point out that all our exaggerations throughout we have seen that we have not been able to have a well coordinated and progressive development of the transport system and in particular the railway system in the country. So anything we suggest today will have that kind of air of unreality, without knowing fully or adequately what exactly the transport needs in the country are. We are not in a position to discuss or dilate upon the problems of the railways or the transport itself. Madam, last year when I was speaking on the budget, I pointed out that there had been planning of some sort, but within this planning, there had not been sufficient planning in the functioning of the administration. There has not been planning in carrying out the various phases of the program enunciated in the plan or in the budget. Frequently, we come across the statement by the Honorable Minister that the railways have not been able to fulfill certain things. I went through the pages of the budget papers and also the speech of the minister. I came across this significant expression: wherever there are failures or shortfalls in performance, we are told that these are mainly due to unpredictable factors or factors beyond control. I do not think that some of the factors which my honorable friend would like us to believe that they are unpredictable or uncontrollable cannot anticipated. For instance, I may draw the attention of the honorable minister to one important fact, that is, we have been supplying since some time past empty haulage for a long distance to quarries, to steel factories, and so on. We are told that this empty haulage is unavoidable, that we have to find empty wagons to steel factories and quarries to carry raw material or perhaps coal and the like. So, for a long distance, we find wagons going empty, but if there had been a research cell, an organization in the ministry to find out ways and means of utilizing these wagons fruitfully by avoiding bottlenecks in between, we could have solved the transport difficulty to a certain extent. I do not want to be told by the minister that this is a physical impossibility. Even in the advanced countries of the world, every movement of wagon, coach, and engine is planned before it is put into operation. It is unfortunate and tragic that in this country, after a decade of planning, we have not been able to think in terms of planning while executing the works. Now, in regard to some of the general problems of the railways, I would say first of all that the rise in demand is so great that we have to be prepared to provide not only adequate but also effective transport facilities to our people. I need not tell the House that the railway transport system in general is greatly dependent or interdependent on the general economy of the country. But during the last one decade, there has been one significant factor that has to be appreciated, that is, the demand for transport is increasing at a faster rate than the rise in the national income or the rise in the production in any sector or in any industry. This is a factor that has not been adequately appreciated. Even if it has been adequately appreciated, no attempt, no sincere effort has yet been made to carry out the fulfillment of the needs of all the sectors of our economy. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Madam Deputy Chairman, the main question for consideration of this House is whether the increase in the passenger fares and in the freights that has been proposed by the Railway Minister should have the support of this House or not. I have been listening with some interest to the speeches so far made, and they are all unanimous and on one point, namely that there should be no increase, particularly so far as the second class passengers are concerned. What we have decided at present is that those friends who have emphasized their opposition to this levy have also said that in view of our developing economy, in view of our developing industrialization, in view of the fact that there is a greater demand for passenger traffic as well as goods traffic, we have to develop our railway system. We have to see that we increase our lines. We have also to see that we double our lines. We have also to see that the production of the locomotives, wagons and coaches is increased with greater rapidity. Otherwise, we will not be able to meet the demand of the developing economy. It is also agreed that according to the recommendations of the Pay Commission, we all feel that our workers, our laborers and are entitled to DA, which will be to the tune of rupees 12 crores. There are no two opinions about it. It is also demanded that so far as amenities to the workers are concerned regarding their privileges and concessions or the repairs to the stock are concerned, there is very urgent need that we should see that our workers do not strain themselves. An engine driver should not be asked to do work for more than 12 hours. Similarly, others in the railways should also have further concessions so far as leisure, rest and leave are concerned. It is also agreed and it has been emphatically stressed on all hands that the second class passengers are not getting amenities which they should get. The greater portion of the income comes from the second class passengers, and the position is that they are not getting their dues by way of rest and comfort which are necessary for them. I appreciate that efforts is being made that so far as sleeping accommodation and provision of fans to the second class passengers are concerned, something is being done. But this does not touch even the fringe of the problem, and when we see the second class passengers huddled together like cattle, not even having sufficient air to breathe in, we feel that there is something seriously wrong with our railway administration. We have also to see that the shortage that we had about the supply of wagons to the coal mines and to our steel industries is not there. Madam It is a strange chain of events that the minister who was in charge of steel and who gave statements in a way implying that the railways are not doing their part well is now saddled with that responsibility, and I am sure he must feel double responsibility because he knows how far the industry has suffered or was likely to suffer. As the Minister of Steel, he charged the railway minister or of not doing things which should have been done. So now these are the problems that we have to meet, and the question arises how to meet them. I quite understand that there could be some economy affected in administration. I could also understand that by tightening the administration and seeing that there is not much of ticketless travel, we could improve the position. I could also understand that by taking effective measures regarding the new responsibility which Parliament has placed on the shoulders of the railway department, namely the liability of a common carrier for goods for which they have provided rupees 2 crores, and by having all these things in mind there could be some reduction in expenditure, but I do not think that reduction would be of a value sufficient to meet the increasing demand of the railways. That is the problem. It is true that it will be hard to increase any fare. It would be hard to increase any freight. We do realize and we do appreciate it, and as representatives of the people, we do feel every day that our people are being taxed more and more. As regards freight, madam, my own views is that so far as food articles are concerned, this proposal should be modified just as there has been a modification in the case of giving encouragement for exports and in certain other respects. Similarly, I feel that so far as food articles are concerned, the proposal should be modified, and on the other things, these freights may continue as proposed. In this way, the danger that has been pointed out by honorable members, and to a certain extent correctly, that if the prices of food articles go up, that would be create difficulty would be avoided. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman, knowing the honorable mover of this resolution to be a good parliamentarian, I had expected that he would place before the House all sides of this problem. I had expected that he would be no less interested in the efficiency and discipline of the administration, no less interested in the public welfare than in the interest of the civil services. But I am sorry to observe that he has taken only one view of the matter, namely the interests of the civil services alone. He has not at all dwelt upon the frightful consequences which a strike of the sort we had the misfortune to have would have had on the country and the people in general. He has spoken, no doubt, in measured terms, unlike the honorable members who sat to his right in the morning and who raised a shout, wanting to make up by sound what his argument lacked in force. I wish to submit to this House that it would be incorrect and it would be imprudent for this House to accept this resolution. It would be incorrect because by accepting this resolution, we would be laying down something bad in principle, and we would also be accepting a policy which would be suicidal and which would cut at the roots of discipline in the services. To the merits of reinstatement or otherwise of these persons, I will come later on. I doubt the very propriety of Parliament going into this matter. Now let us see what has happened. Whether right or wrong, departments have taken up the question of these strikers, those who took part in this strike, those who indulged in disobeying the ordinance. Several cases of sabotage and intimidation, including criminal ones, have been gone into, and the authority have taken some decision. In some cases, the government have taken the decision, and in some cases, the departments have taken the decision. Now, would it be right for Parliament to intervene, to interfere with these decisions? Suppose we do that. Suppose Parliament interfered with the decisions taken by the government or by the heads of departments. Tomorrow, with what face and with what authority can the head of the department extract service from his subordinates? This is the question which the Honorable, the mover, must see, and also the other honorable members who have spoken in support of the resolution. Unemployment is mounting up, and we have not been able to generate enough employment opportunities to provide even for those people who are entering the labor market today, perhaps to the extent envisaged during the 10th plan. The point that I want to make is that it is not quite justifiable to take only one aspect of the 10th plan period, namely the exigencies of capital mobilization, out of the context of the general economic situation in the country. When we are therefore making this huge tax effort, we will have to apply our mind with equal seriousness, if not more, to see that the income generation in the community is as great as is envisaged, so that the savings and investments could be effected without disturbing unnecessarily the consumption pattern in the community. Whenever there is any tax on corporation, this cry is raised, and this cry is always belied by what the industrialists themselves have claimed to be the sensitive barometer to find out the climate for capital formation. I mean the stock exchanges. This time, the stock exchanges have reacted quite favorably to the budget proposals as a whole, which clearly shows that whatever else may be the merit of the present budget proposal, it is certainly not anti-capital. Last year also the stock markets boomed up after the taxation proposals were announced. This time, though they were a little hesitant at first, ultimately I think they have realized that there is nothing wrong with the taxation proposals and they are now merely mounting up. This is quite natural because there are so many benefits and advantages in our economy today that it is not difficult for the cooperative sector to absorb a small rise of 5% in the corporation tax which has been proposed by the Honorable Finance Minister. The economy of the nation today is more or less a closed economy because due to the lack of external finances, imports have been virtually prohibited. There is a lot of planning in the country which makes risk bearing rather unlikely, and because of the regulation of the economy, internal competition is also not very great. The risk bearing capacity, which is claimed by the industrialists, really forgetting large profits and large yields on their investment, is almost non existent in our economy today. Our markets are expanding very fast, and the money generated is much more than the production of commodities, with the result that there are shortages is almost every commodities. It should not be difficult for the industrialists to absorb the small rise of 5% in the corporate tax. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman Sir, the Plantations Labour Bill 2003 was introduced in the Rajya Sabha on the 6th March 2003. Then it was referred to a joint committee of both the houses, and this joint committee submitted its report in 2005. Now we are discussing this bill today after 6 years of the submission of the report by the joint committee. Hence, the bill would not be able to deal with the present day expectations of the workers of the plantations. The original act in regard to the plantation labor, namely the Act of 2001 itself, provided various welfare measures for the plantation labor. But unfortunately, the planter nonchalantly violated all these provisions for welfare measures. The main question, therefore, is the question of implementation of the provisions of the Act. Mere amendments will not be improved the position. There is no provision in the present bill also as to how these measures, these provisions can be implemented and what the government is thinking in terms of implementing these provisions. In most cases, even the government officials who are deputed for the purpose of inspecting the gardens, they themselves side with the planters. If government officers themselves side with the planters, where is the remedy? Hence, we should devise ways and means and adopt measures so that the provisions which are made in the Act and the present bill, are implemented properly. Sir, the provisions in the present bill fall for short of the expectations of the working population in the plantation. In the present bill, it has been suggested that the agri age of the plantations in regard to which this act will be applied will be reduced to 5 hectares. But this is also not sufficient, because under this also the owners, the planters, will take shelter and many of the plantation will still remain uncovered. This should be further reduced to 2.5 hectares. So far as compensation for house collapse is concerned, it has been said here that if the occupant of the house is directly responsible for the collapse, he will not be entitled to compensation. Under this provision, sir, the employers will take shelter and deprive many workers of getting compensation. Sir, it is known to everybody that the plantation industry is the biggest foreign exchange earning industry. The productivity of this industry in India can increase only if the labor are contented. Contented labor alone can improve the efficiency and productivity of the plantation industry. So the need of the hour is not to bring such piecemeal legislation. What is needed today is a comprehensive bill which should deal with all aspects of the working conditions of the plantation labor. The need of the day is to introduce such a bill where workers will have full participation in managing the gardens, and this plantation industry should be nationalized immediately. Sir, Assam is one of the most important tea producing states in the country. There, formerly, the tea gardens were owned by the Britishers. Now, the Indian have purchased those gardens. After these gardens have gone to the hands of the Indian planters, the situation has not improved, rather, it has deteriorated. The efficiency of the gardens has deteriorated. Even the local people and educated tea labor youths are being deprived of getting employment in the gardens. Therefore, steps should immediately be taken to nationalize this industry. Here, sir, I would like to inform the House that in 1998-99, the ruling Janata Party in the Assam Assembly had adopted a resolution unanimously for nationalization of tea industry in Assam. If the government is not willing to nationalize the entire plantation industry, I would request that the government should take early steps at least to nationalize the tea industry in Assam. It is a very vital matter for the economic self-sufficiency of Assam state, and it is very important from the point of view of increasing efficiency and productivity of the gardens also. I would like the government not only to pass this amendment bill, which I have risen to support, but also to ensure its implementation as best as it can. Otherwise, getting it passed and keeping a copy of it in the library or elsewhere will not improve the conditions of the plantation workers. I want proper implementation, proper enforcement of the law, and I want that desired amenities and facilities should be provided to these workers, and it should be ensured that employers do provide these amenities. When this question of joint committee was taken up in this house, our late friend Mr. Bhupesh Gupta was there, and he also voiced his feelings and said that these plantations should be acquired by the government. These are generally foreign owned establishments, and they are the centers, at least in Assam, of anti-Indian activities. These plantations deserve to be taken over by the government as early as possible. Stop. Starting in 5 seconds. Mr. Vice Chairman, Sir, I would like to speak on this bill in the interest of the rapid economic growth in the country. If the nation grows from strength to strength economically, leading to eradication of the degrading and disheartening poverty of the people of India, the workers of this nation would also benefit and they would also go above the poverty line. Sir, I would like to mention here that the plantation crops, as understood by the term so far, namely coffee, rubber, tea, and cardamom, have been giving this nation substantial amount of the much coveted foreign exchange annually. It must be noted that coffee exports alone have given our country during the last 5 years over rupees 1000 crores in foreign exchange by way of export earnings and export duties. I must also bring to the attention of this House that the famed tea industry in India today has become a sick industry affecting lakhs of workers and the tea planters. Sir, we ought to know that in the agricultural sector, the plantation labor is the best organized one and is getting nearly the same treatment, facilities, and amenities like the industrial labor. Sir, coming from a plantation district of Karnataka, I sincerely agree that the welfare measures provided in the Act must be faithfully implemented and strictly enforced. But I cannot subscribe to the view taken by some that the planters generally are exploiters and are inimical to the interests of their own workers and that they must be dealt with severely. Sir, most of the planters of today are educated and they know that contented labor is conducive to productivity and peace in the estates and therefore would like to provide all the welfare measures and amenities to the workers. Sir, I would like to point out some of the very draconian, discriminatory, and invidious urban directed amendments made in the Plantation Labor Amendment Bill 2013. Sir, the Plantations Labor Act is sought to be applied now even to holdings of 5 hectares and above employing 15 persons and more. Originally, in the bill brought before the Joint Committee, it was sought to be applied to holdings of 6.5 hectares and above. It would be realistic to make an amendment to the present bill to raise the size of holdings from 5 hectares to 6.5 hectares. Sir, we must bear in mind the economic viability of small plantations of 5 hectares and the financial capacity of the small planters to fulfill the obligations cast on them to provide housing and krishi facilities. Those small planters in some cases are unable to provide themselves with houses and medical care as good as those intended for their workers in the bill. I am sure that good many small holdings will go into liquidation, unable to bear the burden when the price fall, as in the case of tea today. I would emphatically say that clause 13 is not only draconian but discriminatory, and it is most harsh and killing to the farming community of India, whose hands feed and clothe the people, poor and rich. Sir, I strongly feel that the punishment with both compulsory fine and imprisonment is too severe for violation of a welfare legislation covered by the Act. For economic reasons and financial incapacity, the debt-ridden employer, particularly a smallholder, may be unable to discharge the obligations such as providing type design houses, creches, medical facilities, etc. In such cases, there is no point in sending the landholder to jail and collecting a fine from him for every day of default. The relevant provisions in the bill are made more stringent than the Factories Act, under which, in the case of a further offence, the court is given the discretion to punish the defaulting employer. But in the proposed amendment, the word used is shall instead of may, will makes it mandatory on the court to impose imprisonment as well as fine. These provisions are too harsh and discriminatory, particularly in view of the fact that the bill seeks to bring in farms of 5 hectares, which are in the nature of peasant holdings under the scope of the Act. Sir, I would like to ask the government of the people, for the people, and by the people, in the name of the farmers of India, why it wants to treat a farmer as a criminal and to be imprisoned for such an offence, while it does not do so for a factory owner of a city. By making this comparison, I do not mean that a provision should be made in the relevant Factories Act to make the sentence of imprisonment compulsory for similar offences. Let me make it clear that I am not speaking against the interests of the workers in the plantations. I am only speaking against the stringent and invidious measures which have been provided in the bill affecting the rural employers and the invidious laws enacted for them. Stop.